Cleaner's black son is mocked by engineers until he repairs a colossal industrial engine. Hey King, how about cleaning properly this time? Is your mother as sloppy as you are? Vivian Monroe's voice, sharp and laced with derision, cut through the Apex Engineering Lab, followed by a chorus of laughter that echoed like shards of glass. 26-year-old Akeem Johnson continued to methodically scrub the test bench, his eyes fixed on the colossal industrial engine that dominated the center of the room. That machine had been sitting there for 12 years, a monument to a multi-million-pound failure, gathering dust and disappointment. Seriously, guys, Vivian continued, adjusting her expensive blazer as her fellow engineers gathered around like vultures circling carrion. Do you think he really understands what he's looking at, or is he just pretending to be interested to impress someone? Charlotte Miller, the senior supervisor, didn't even bother to hide her contempt. Monroe, don't be so cruel. He's probably never seen a machine that wasn't a mop. The others laughed even louder. David Wright, the chief engineer, approached with his smartphone held high. Hey guys, I'm recording this for our internal comms. Title: Cleaner Tries to Understand Engineering. It'll go viral in the office. More laughter echoed through the room, each peal chipping away at the dignity Akeem maintained with superhuman effort. Akeem had worked at Apex for 3 years, first as a cleaning assistant alongside his mother, then alone when she suffered a severe back injury exacerbated by the stress of enduring similar daily humiliations. The engineers at Apex treated him like an inanimate object, useful but invisible unless they needed something cleaned. What none of them knew was that he had grown up in his grandfather's scrapyard in rural Yorkshire, where discarded engines roared with stories of resilience and forgotten potential. Do you know what the problem with this thing is? Vivian asked, patting the engine condescendingly. 40 million pounds invested. The best experts in the country have tried to fix it, and it's still a very expensive paperweight. Maybe our cleaner here has some revolutionary theory. Miller sneered. I bet he thinks the problem is a lack of bleach. The joke drew laughter that reverberated off the lab walls like echoes of institutionalized cruelty. Akeem remembered his grandfather, Old Man Fitzwilliam, a white, gruff, but brilliant self-taught mechanic, saying, "Lad, engines are like people. When they hurt, they whisper." Only those who truly listen with their heart, not just their ears, will understand where it aches. While those women and men with expensive degrees wasted 6-figure salaries on pompous theories, Akeem had spent 3 years watching every failed attempt, every far-fetched solution, every elite consultant who left the room shaking their head in defeat. He must be trying to decipher the tiny letters in the manuals, Wright laughed, pointing to the technical diagrams. Poor thing, he probably can't even read properly. Typical of those people, the pause before the word people was loaded with a venom that everyone understood perfectly. Akeem felt his blood boil, but he kept his hands steady on the cleaning cloth because sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon against ignorance armed with arrogance. Hey, Johnson, Vivian shouted, now using his last name as if it were an insult. Stop pretending you know anything and finish cleaning. We have an important meeting with investors in an hour, and they can't see this mess. In front of all the contemptuous stares, Akeem stood firm like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. Because what those women and men in their expensive suits didn't know was that sometimes the solution to complex problems is right in front of your eyes, hidden behind the prejudice of those who refuse to see beyond their own limitations. Make him clean the executive bathroom too. Vivian Monroe ordered on the phone loud enough for Akeem to hear from the hallway. If the king wants to stick his nose where it doesn't belong, he might as well be useful. The following days turned into a systematic campaign of humiliation. Charlotte Miller began accidentally leaving sticky coffee cups on his desk. David Wright made a point of throwing crumpled paper on the floor whenever he walked by, whispering comments about people who don't know their place in society. Hey Johnson, Vivian shouted on Tuesday, interrupting a project meeting. Can you stop pretending to clean and actually work? We have important clients visiting tomorrow, and they can't see this. She gestured toward him as if he were a defective object. Laura White from Human Resources appeared with a form. Akeem, we've had some complaints about your behavior. Apparently, you've been approaching technical equipment without authorization. Her voice dripped with false concern. You understand that this could be interpreted as attempted sabotage. Akeem came home every night with sore knees from scrubbing floors and a broken heart from the laughter that echoed through the hallways. His small council apartment felt like a fragile refuge from the storm of contempt he faced every day. There, surrounded by the rusty tools he had inherited from his grandfather, he remembered the afternoons in the scrapyard when he was 15. "Engines don't lie, lad," Old Man Fitzwilliam used to say, his calloused hands guiding Akeem's through the components of an old rover. "People can lie, paper can lie, but engines always tell the truth. Do you hear what this one's saying?" Those lessons seemed to echo through the Apex lab every time Akeem looked at the idle engine while the engineers debated complex theories and consulted 1,000-page manuals. He heard something they couldn't perceive, a mechanical whisper begging for attention in places no one else looked. "Just listen to this," Vivian said during a staff meeting on Wednesday. "Our special cleaning man was seen yesterday leafing through technical manuals at the lab table. Someone needs to explain to him that cleaning doesn't include reading." Laughter spread through the room like wildfire. Miller shook her head in exaggerated disbelief. "Maybe he thinks he'll discover something that 50 trained engineers haven't been able to figure out in 12 years. That kind of behavior is exactly what we expect from, well, you know," White said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "People who grew up without a proper family structure, no sense of social hierarchy." Akeem remained invisible behind the glass door, organizing cleaning supplies while absorbing every poisonous word. What none of them knew was that he had spent his entire childhood in a family structure that would teach them more about engineering in one afternoon than they had learned in 4 years of expensive university. On Thursday, Wright decided to create a new level of entertainment. "Guys, how about a test? Let's see if our cleaning expert can identify at least 3 basic engine components." He pointed to different parts of the machine like a condescending teacher. "I bet 50 pounds he doesn't even know what a piston is." Miller laughed, pulling her wallet out of her pocket. 100 that he confuses a valve with a bolt," added Vivian, clearly enjoying the situation. Akeem stopped cleaning and looked at them directly for the first time in days. 6-cylinder, horizontally opposed pistons, variable valve timing, and a microfracture in the exhaust manifold on cylinder 4, causing a pressure leak. His voice cut through the silence like a knife. The lab fell completely silent. The engineers looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable with the technical precision they had just heard from someone who couldn't even read properly. "Beginner's luck," stammered Wright. "Anyone can memorize a few technical words." "Maybe we should install security cameras in the lab," Miller suggested, trying to regain control of the situation to protect sensitive equipment from inappropriate curiosity. On Friday, Vivian decided to up the cruelty level. During lunch, when the lab was empty, she set her phone to record and began her performance. "Everyone, come see this. Our cleaning specialist is trying to fix the 40 pounds million engine." Akeem had approached the machine just to wipe off an oil stain, but Vivian narrated it as if he were sabotaging military equipment. "Look at his concentration. I bet he's calculating the air pressure based on the position of the moon." The video instantly went viral in the company's internal group. Employees from other floors began making technical visits to the lab just to see the improvised mechanic in action. Even senior executives started commenting on the Johnson situation. "Did you see that hilarious video?" asked Sophie Green, director of marketing, during an executive meeting. "At least we know our cleaning staff is interested in the job." But while everyone laughed, none of them noticed what was really going on. Akeem wasn't trying to fix anything at that moment. He was observing, cataloging, memorizing every detail that those experts had ignored during 12 years of million-pound failures. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside him that his oppressors couldn't see, a quiet determination fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose. Like an engine being primed to fire at exactly the moment no one expected it. The weekend passed like an eternity. Akeem relived every humiliation, every laugh, every look of contempt he had received on Friday. But it was on Sunday, while organizing his grandfather's tools in his small apartment, that he found something that would change everything: a worn, oil-stained technical notebook that Old Man Fitzwilliam had kept for 60 years as a mechanic. Engine problems always have 3 causes. Read one of the first pages: air, fuel, or spark. Complicated engineers forget the simple. Machines don't lie, people do. And sometimes, the fault lies not in the machine, but in the observer's blind spot. His grandfather's words seemed to whisper directly into his ears, like advice from beyond the grave. On Monday, Akeem returned to work with a quiet determination that no one noticed. While Vivian and her colleagues continued their cruel jokes, he began to look at the engine with completely different eyes, not as a curious cleaning man, but as Old Man Fitzwilliam's grandson. "Hey, King," Miller shouted during coffee break. "I hear you know how to identify engine parts. How about impressing us again?" More laughter echoed through the lab, but this time Akeem noticed something different, the defensive tone in their voices. That's when he realized something crucial. They were afraid. Afraid that a mere cleaning man might know something they didn't. The piston joke had made them uncomfortable, and now they were trying to regain control through intensified humiliation. "You know what, Johnson?" Wright said, approaching him with his characteristic arrogance. "Since you seem so interested in our 40 million pounds engine, how about we give you a real chance? We bet you can't even identify the main problem." Vivian clapped her hands. "Yes, let's make a bet. If he can point out the problem, each of us pays 100 pounds. If he fails," she paused dramatically, "he never sets foot in this lab again, and he's formally dismissed from Apex." The proposal spread quickly across the floor. Within minutes, at least 30 employees had gathered in the lab. Laura White even brought a small bag of crisps. "Take the challenge," Miller taunted. "I accept," Akeem said simply, his voice cutting through the noise of the side conversations. The silence that followed was broken by even louder laughter. "He actually accepted," someone shouted. It was then that an unexpected voice cut through the laughter. "May I observe?" Everyone turned to see Professor Arthur Davies, the renowned aerospace engineer and former university lecturer who occasionally visited the company as a consultant. At 75, Davies was a living legend in the industry, the man who had designed engines for 3 of the country's largest aerospace companies and a close associate of Old Man Fitzwilliam. "Of course, Professor Davies," Wright said quickly, clearly nervous, "but it's just a joke. The cleaning man thinks he knows about engines." Davies walked slowly toward Akeem, his experienced eyes studying both him and the idle machine. "What's your name, young man?" "Akeem Johnson, sir." "Johnson?" Davies repeated thoughtfully. "Are you related to Fitzwilliam, the mechanic who had the scrapyard near the Yorkshire Dales?" Akeem's heart nearly stopped. "He was my grandfather, sir. Did you know him?" A genuine smile spread across Davies' face. "Old Man Fitzwilliam taught me more about engines than any college professor. He was the most intuitive mechanic I ever knew. He had a way of listening to them that was uncanny. He always said, 'The greatest engineers are those who know when to trust their gut over the schematics.'" He looked around the room. "If you have half his intuition, these guys are about to learn a valuable lesson." Vivian and Miller exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. The joke suddenly seemed less amusing when a legendary engineer was publicly validating Akeem's technical pedigree, especially given his grandfather's race contrasting with Akeem's own. So Davies said, turning to Akeem with genuine interest, "Tell me, what do you see when you look at this machine, young Johnson?" Akeem approached the engine, his hands delicately touching different components as his mind processed everything he had learned. The lab fell silent. For a moment, when he closed his eyes and placed his hand on the engine, everyone thought they were witnessing just another theatrical performance. But anyone watching closely would have noticed that it wasn't acting. It was the contained power of someone who was about to completely rewrite the rules of the game. Akeem approached the engine with the precision of a surgeon. His hands touched different components delicately as he whispered to himself, "Listen first, then look, then touch." "Did you hear that?" he said, turning to the stunned crowd. "The engine has been trying to talk for 12 years. You just never bothered to listen." Vivian Monroe felt a chill in her stomach. The confidence in Akeem's voice was completely different. "He's bluffing," she muttered to Miller, but her voice betrayed her growing uncertainty. Akeem knelt down near the base of the engine and put his ear to a specific section. "Here," he said, pointing to an area that looked identical to dozens of others. Do you feel that subtle vibration? That's the first problem. It's a hairline crack in the primary fuel injector manifold, almost invisible to the eye, but it's causing micro-leaks that throw off the fuel-air mixture. Professor Davies approached, clearly intrigued. Go on, young Johnson. Clogged cooling system in the secondary line, Akeem said, moving to another section with growing confidence. The engine was overheating internally, but the main sensors never detected it because they only monitored the primary circuit. And it wasn't a natural clog, was it, Miss Miller? This looks deliberate, perhaps a small, almost imperceptible obstruction that slowly built up over time. The silence in the lab was deafening. Charlotte Miller's face went stark white. She furtively glanced at her phone, then back at Akeem, a flicker of panic in her eyes. David Wright had stopped smiling completely. Second problem. Akeem continued, pointing to a nearly invisible valve on top of the machine. Pressure valve calibrated for sea level. You guys are 300 meters above sea level here in Nottingham. The atmospheric pressure is different. Davies nodded slowly, his eyes shining with recognition. Of course. How stupid of us not to consider that fundamental environmental variable for 12 years. Laura White whispered something to a colleague, clearly trying to process how an uneducated cleaning man was diagnosing problems that 50 trained engineers had missed and now implying criminal intent. Reality was beginning to crack. And the third problem, Akeem said, walking to a side section of the engine, is where you really demonstrated your, how can I put this politely, systematic incompetence. And perhaps, Miss Monroe, your utter disregard for ethical engineering practices. Vivian gulped. Akeem pointed to an electronic control panel. You installed a state-of-the-art monitoring system, but you forgot to calibrate it to the exact specifications of this engine model and its unique installation environment. Result: it was running perfectly for 12 years, but you were reading completely wrong data. And the forgot part is interesting, isn't it? Because this specific calibration error would lead to constant false overheating readings, prompting engineers to shut it down, making it appear faulty when it was perfectly fine. That's impossible, stammered Wright. We checked and rechecked all the systems hundreds of times. You checked according to generic manuals, Akeem replied with devastating calm. My grandfather always said manuals teach you about engines in general, but every engine is unique like a person. You have to know its personality. And he also said, beware the engineer who always finds a problem, for they might be the one creating it. Professor Davies began to laugh, not in mockery but in genuine admiration. Old man Fitzwilliam was right as always. Young man, you just solved in 20 minutes what cost this company £40 million in consulting fees and a decade of lost productivity. It was at that moment that reality hit Vivian Monroe like a tsunami. An ignorant black cleaning man had just humiliated her professionally in front of the entire company. Worse, he had done so with technical expertise superior to hers and hinted at deliberate malpractice. You can prove that? Miller asked, her voice trembling slightly, looking directly at Akeem. Akeem smiled for the first time. Not a submissive smile, but the confident smile of someone who was about to close the deal. Professor Davies, would you mind helping me? I need someone to monitor the indicators while I make the adjustments, and perhaps someone to verify the initial calibration logs. I believe Miss Monroe and Miss Miller might have some explaining to do regarding those. It would be my pleasure, Mr. Johnson. Davies replied, his gaze chilling as it swept over the two white women. For the next 30 minutes, Akeem performed a series of precise adjustments while Davies watched the monitors and quietly reviewed digital logs on a company tablet. Each correction was accompanied by technical explanations that left the engineers increasingly red with embarrassment. Pressure normalizing, Davies announced. Temperature within ideal parameters. Electrical system responding perfectly. And according to these logs, he said, turning the tablet to show the room, the initial calibration was deliberately skewed to cause false readings. Miss Monroe, Miss Miller, this is a very serious matter. Laura White tried to slip out of the room, but Davies intercepted her. Miss White, I believe the company owes Mr. Johnson a formal explanation as to how an employee with superior technical knowledge was relegated to cleaning duties. and how accusations of sabotage against him arose while actual sabotage seemed to be occurring within your department. Wright began to sweat visibly. Professor Davies. 1. We didn't know. He never showed. He never showed. Davies interrupted, his voice cutting like a razor. Or did you never deign to listen to someone you considered inferior? Or perhaps, did you have a vested interest in the engine not working? Vivian tried one last desperate card. But he has no technical training. He doesn't have a degree. Neither did my grandfather, Old Man Fitzwilliam, Akeem replied calmly. But he taught engineers from Rolls-Royce more about engines than any university. Knowledge doesn't come from a piece of paper, Miss Monroe. It comes from listening, learning, and the willingness to see past your own biases. Akeem stood in front of the main control panel. Would someone like to do the honors? Or should I start up a 40 million pounds engine myself? No one answered. The lab had turned into a silent courtroom where the accusers were discovering who the real guilty parties were. Akeem pressed the ignition button. The engine roared back to life with a force that made the entire building vibrate. Not the hesitant rumble of a sick machine, but the powerful, steady roar of a giant finally awakened. Green lights flashed on the panels, gauges stabilized at optimal levels, and the rhythmic sound of gears filled the lab like a mechanical symphony. The crowd fell silent, watching a machine that had been given up for dead come back to life at the hands of someone they considered too incompetent to be in the same building. Professor Davies broke the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed one of the most brilliant diagnoses I have seen in 50 years of engineering, and a clear case of professional negligence, if not outright misconduct, by certain members of your team. Sophie Green, who had laughed at the hilarious video the week before, tried to approach with a forced smile. Akeem, what an impressive demonstration. Maybe we can talk about what? Akeem interrupted. About how you spent months treating me like human trash. About the video you made to humiliate me. About the racist and classist jokes you thought I couldn't hear. About the apparent sabotage designed to make the engine seem perpetually broken, perhaps to justify continued consulting fees or hide incompetence. Green turned pale. The viral video had been her idea. Vivian Monroe, Charlotte Miller, and David Wright remained silent, their faces going through a progression of expressions: shock, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally, a devastating realization that they had spent months humiliating someone infinitely more competent than themselves and potentially implicated themselves in criminal activity. Mr. Johnson, Davies said, turning to him with genuine respect, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? I have some contacts in Rolls-Royce and Airbus who would love to meet you. And I believe we need to discuss some rather serious implications for Apex Engineering based on what we've just uncovered. As the engine continued to run perfectly, creating a triumphant soundtrack to the collective humiliation that had just taken place, everyone understood that they weren't just witnessing the solution to a technical problem. They were witnessing the complete demolition of a system based on prejudice disguised as competence and the exposure of a deep-seated corruption. The real injustice wasn't that a cleaner knew about engines, but that engineers with degrees were as incompetent as they were arrogant and possibly malicious. 3 months later, Akeem Johnson walked the halls of Rolls-Royce Aerospace as a senior consulting engineer, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Professor Davies had kept his promise, introducing him to executives who immediately recognized the value of someone who could listen to machines in a way that expensive instruments couldn't. Mr. Johnson, Rolls-Royce's director of engineering, told him during his first week, "Your intuitive approach saved us £5 million on the first audit alone. Would you like to head up our new intuitive diagnostics division, specifically focusing on complex legacy systems?" Vivian Monroe, on the other hand, discovered that competence was not negotiable in the real world, especially when criminal intent was suspected. After the engine incident and Davies's formal report, an internal and external forensic audit revealed not only her signing off on technical reports without understanding them, but also clear evidence of her involvement in the initial skewed calibration designed to make the engine appear unfixable. She was arrested within 2 weeks on charges of fraud and professional misconduct, with the potential for industrial espionage charges pending further investigation. Charlotte Miller and David Wright suffered similar fates. Miller was demoted to junior technician after it was discovered that her previous solutions had cost Apex millions in unnecessary repairs, and she was implicated as a co-conspirator in the calibration fraud. Wright was transferred to a remote branch in Scotland, where he worked under constant supervision, facing a tribunal for gross negligence, a professional humiliation from which he would never recover. Laura White desperately tried to delete the viral video she had created, but the internet is forever. Her career in human resources ended when other companies discovered her active participation in workplace racial and class discrimination. No reputable corporation wanted to be associated with someone documented as humiliating employees, especially given the criminal charges against her colleagues. Apex Engineering faced a federal audit on discriminatory practices and corporate fraud after the case gained national notoriety. The company paid substantial fines, faced major criminal investigations, and was required to implement rigorous diversity, inclusion, and ethical oversight programs. Ironically, having to hire consultants to teach them what Akeem had always known: talent has no color, no class, and true ethics are paramount. You know what the most ironic part is? Professor Davies said during a celebratory dinner 6 months later. His grandfather, Old Man Fitzwilliam, taught me more about engines in one afternoon in 1980 than these people learned in 4 years of university. Akeem smiled, touching the necklace that held a small, engraved wrench, a gift from his mother. He always said that engines are like people. You have to treat them with respect and listen to their true story to get the best out of them. Sophie Green, who once laughed at the hilarious video, now worked as a receptionist at a local community center. Her marketing degree was worth less than the common sense and empathy she never developed during an unsuccessful job interview. A recruiter had mentioned, "We saw the video where you humiliate an employee. You're not the kind of person we hire." The £40 million engine had been running perfectly for 9 months, generating record profits for Apex, now under new, ethical leadership. A discreet plaque next to the machine now read, "Restored by Akeem Johnson, Intuitive Diagnostics Lead. Special thanks to Old Man Fitzwilliam." Vivian Monroe now worked on a chain gang, serving her sentence for corporate fraud and misconduct, ironically learning the hard way what Akeem had always known: that real freedom comes from integrity, not from diplomas or ill-gotten gains. Her attempts at appealing her conviction were consistently denied due to the damning evidence of deliberate sabotage. "Young man," Professor Davies said during a conference where Akeem was presenting his techniques to hundreds of engineers, "your grandfather would be incredibly proud. You've proven that wisdom is priceless, but ignorance and malice always come at the highest price." Akeem's talk went viral for completely different reasons than the previous video. This time, millions watched a young black man teach engineers from prestigious universities about the importance of humility, observation, respect, and ethics, values that no degree can impart, and a powerful lesson about the hidden dangers of unchecked arrogance and prejudice. Miller tried to enroll in one of his online courses but was rejected. Limited spots for qualified professionals. Read the automated email, a delicious irony considering who now defined qualified. Akeem's true revenge was not to destroy other people's careers, but to build something greater than his oppressors could ever imagine. He turned humiliation into motivation, prejudice into purpose, and other people's incompetence and malice into his own opportunity. "You know what my biggest mistake was?" Wright confessed to a former colleague months later, now toiling under constant supervision. "I thought a degree was worth more than knowledge, and that a person's skin or background defined their worth. Now I work for people who know more than me without ever having set foot in a classroom. And I have to live with the consequences of my own closed-mindedness." Akeem Johnson had proven that true engineering is not about memorizing formulas, but about the ability to listen, observe, respect both machines and people, and the unyielding pursuit of truth, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply to be better and to expose the rot that tries to hold others down.